So I guess this is just going to be a trend now, but in recording this video, I did not realize that I had forgotten to plug in my mic while I was recording. So the audio that you hear is coming directly from my camera and is not going to be as good. I did not realize this was an issue until like halfway through the video. Didn't feel like I should switch it up because it would have been jarring as hell. So if you're wondering like why the audio is a little bit less crisp than it usually is, that is the reason. But either way, let's just go ahead and hopefully you enjoy the video. Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and yes, Survivor 47, still very much happening, still a season of television that I initially was planning to do, individual episode reviews of. I very much meant to stick to it. I literally typed out my notes for episode 3 and was planning to do that video, and then October and November just ended up being like way busier months than I expect them to be. I had a lot going on. I just didn't really have a lot of time to keep up with it, and as a result, I ended up falling behind, as you can see, and we're now in a place where there's like 3 episodes left. Thankfully, 3 episodes left, not 2 episodes left, because if there were 2 episodes left this season, I honestly probably would have just waited till this season was over to do this video. But thankfully, they have announced that they're dividing the finale into 2 episodes, so it actually does give me a little bit more of an excuse to at least be like, okay, I missed most of this season, but I will at least cover the last 3 episodes of the season individually. And so the point is, like, I just really wanted to go ahead and just find time to catch up on this season because, if you saw from my review the first 2 episodes, I was really liking this season a lot. I think there's a lot that they did very well. I think something I can give them right off the bat is that normally, in Survivor, I feel like it has gotten kind of formulaic when it comes to the pre-merge and things like that, but I like that this season we had all different tribes. We had all 3 tribes going to tribal more than once, and it created some really great drama, some really great intrigue. But here's the problem. We're now at a point where the last time I reviewed this season was episode 2, which means I have almost like 8 episodes to talk about. And just for the sake of time, I don't want this video to be 3 hours. This is not necessarily going to be an overall look at, all 8 of these episodes individually, kind of giving you a sense of what happened in each and every one of them. I just don't think that would work for this video. I think it would make things far too messy. I think, I'm talking about things that happened like over 2 months ago at this point. If you've been keeping up with this season, you know what's been going on, so I don't really feel like there's a reason for me to go ahead and do that. So instead, I'm going to do things a little bit differently here. I'm going to give you my general thoughts on this season overall, but the majority of this video instead, I'm going to talk about each episode, but I'm going to do it through the perspective of who ended up leaving throughout that episode. And I'm going to try to frame it specifically around that player, kind of give you a sense of what I thought caused their downfall, why they ended up in the position that they did, if I felt that there was more they could have done. And then towards the end, because we still have 3 episodes left, I'm going to talk about the final 7 contestants that remain, the final 7 castaways that remain, who I think has the best shot to win, how I think they've played overall, what I think they've really done to get themselves to this point. And this way, I feel like I'm kind of covering everything, but doing it in a more condensed way, and just, again, preventing this video from being far too long than it needs to be. But either way, I'm already rambling. Let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So before I do talk about each of the players that have been eliminated, I do want to give just my general thoughts on this season so far, and that is that I really like this season for the most part. I think there's a lot that they've done very well. I said it in the first 2 episodes, and I'll say it again. I really like the fact that, this is a cast where normally there is one tribe that is pretty much dominating the entire way through. They never go to tribal, and as a result, their content that we get in the episode, ends up being relatively not filler, but just not as effective compared to everybody else, because we know they're never actually going to vote each other out. So we're just kind of waiting for the merge to happen when they start to turn each other and seeing, is this going to go somewhere, or are they just going to stick together and nothing's really going to come of this? So it's been really refreshing. Meanwhile, you have these, this other tribe that is just consistently getting picked off, and you're wondering if they're even going to make it to merge. Then you have another tribe that sometimes goes to tribal, but most of the time they don't. And so it's been really refreshing this season to see that all three of these tribes have been vulnerable throughout. There has not been a tribe that has been dominating. There has not been one that has been more, in flux than the other. Each one of them have gone to tribal at least once. Yes, Tuku only ends up going to tribal once in the pre-merge, but still, because of the fact they've gone to tribal once, there's this momentum that they could go again, and they are very well prepared to do so. And as a result, it makes their storylines that much more intriguing. When we are focusing on each tribe, it feels like there's a bit more of this level of intensity, because, okay, this could be the one where they lose, because we know that they have before, they very well could again. And I found that to be very exciting, because it's just not something we normally see in a Survivor season, or at least the ones I've seen. I'm sure it's happened in other Survivor seasons, but the ones that I've watched, I feel like it's gotten pretty formulaic in that sense. So that is to say, I think the pre-merge phase of this season is honestly one of the best I have seen. I think that, each round was really exciting. It did not go in the direction that I expected to, and I think it really just made for some of the most exciting episodes of Survivor that I have really seen. I think the pre-merge in general was just so much fun. But then we get into the merge, and I feel like the merge, it's not been bad. Like, this is not a boring merge by any means. It's not like 43, where I found that merge to be mostly boring and didn't really go in and just kind of, didn't really go in a direction that really just excited me. But it definitely, I think, compared to the pre-merge, where, like I said, there was this level of uncertainty, I think the thing with the merge phase is that things have been just a little bit more predictable. The people that end up going in the merge phase are people that I mostly expected to go out. There's a couple exceptions here and there that I think were a little bit surprising. But as a whole, I think the merge, there's just been a little too much emphasis on... But overall, when it comes to merge, I think there is two issues here that is holding it back. One is, and this is both a positive and a negative, the edit is very confusing when it comes to the merge. I think the pre-merge, there were clearly main characters on each tribe. It felt like this is who we're following. We're kind of seeing things through their eyes, and this is the way it's going to go. Like, for example, if we're going to Lavo, it's probably going to be focused around, if we're focusing on Gata, it's probably going to be focused around Sam, Andy, or Sierra, and kind of seeing how they are reacting to things. If we're going over to Lavo, very much usually focused around Rome. Maybe Teeny as well, but most of the time it's very much focused around Rome. And if we're going to Tuku, it's pretty much always going to be focused around Sue or Gabe, and I think that's really the main players on that side of things. Everyone else is kind of secondary. But getting into the merge, there isn't really a main character that we're following. I think in these last couple episodes, we're finally starting to see that change up a bit, but as a result, it makes for a season that is kind of hard to follow at points. There are many points throughout this batch of episodes where I'm like, what is really important here? What is really the focus? What is really going to come into play? And that does make things really exciting, because it keeps it unpredictable throughout. You don't really know what direction we're fully going in, and I think that was definitely exciting to watch, but I think it also made things a little bit frustrating, because seeing the way things were playing out, it made it... because just seeing the way the things were playing out, there were just things that I wanted to know more about. And I think for me, the biggest issue with the merge has been that the merge episodes themselves have mostly been really good, but they feel very overbloated. And it's not really because of the fact that there's all these conversations that are happening that I don't feel like we're getting to see. It's the fact that, well, yes, I think these 90-minute episodes have definitely benefited this season, there has been a little bit too much emphasis, I think, on the idea of the fact that we have these longer episodes now means that, while we are getting a lot of strategy, we're also going to try to add something special to each episode. And that's really where we get to, I think, the main thing is that there is a huge over-reliance on twists this season, and it just is really lessening the excitement when it comes to it, because it frequently results in a player or sometimes even multiple players losing their votes, and as a result, not really having much to do in the episode. They kind of are just sitting around being like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope things can still go my way, even though I have no, power of any kind. And look, I get it. You want to try to spice things up, but I do think at this particular point of the game, I think 46 last season really got it right, because they recognized that because we're now in the merge and there's all this natural conflict going on, which there is in this season, you don't need to force all this drama. You don't need to force all these different powers to come into play, because it just makes it feel manufactured. It makes it feel like the focus is on stuff that you introduce, and as a result, and because of that, things end up feeling a bit more results-oriented than they really should, but also, again, it just doesn't feel like we're getting as much focus on what's important, which is the vote, because there's players that can't vote. Hell, there's literally one episode where you have a group of people who have won a challenge, and they're going to the sanctuary to discuss who the vote should be. Then you have another group of people who are going on a journey to essentially compete to get their vote back, and whoever loses ends up just losing their vote for this round. Meanwhile, we have like 20 minutes left of the episode, and this takes up a good at least like 15 minutes of that like 30 minutes that we have. So you can really see the issue here is that it just feels like the strategy talks before Tribal, we just don't get to see as much of it. Doesn't feel like they are as much in the forefront. Now, again, I do think these past couple episodes that has become less of an issue, but I just think that they really just need to kind of pump the brakes when it comes to these advantages. I think the way they were doing it in the pre-merge, I was fine with. I like the fact that they were kind of making them play idols right away. It made it so they kind of had to play their idol. I liked the fact that they weren't trying to force all this different stuff. It was way more up to players if they wanted to do that. But now it feels like we just have to have something every single episode, and you really just don't. I'm not saying that every twist they've done have been bad. I actually think that there's some pretty cool ones. Like, for example, I really liked the idea of the duos where one person gets to kind of pick all the duos. I thought that was kind of a cool idea when it came to that challenge. I didn't mind that twist necessarily. I still like what they do with the auction. I think that was a really good idea. I thought that was the only time somebody losing their vote actually ended up somewhat mattering, which we'll get to. And I especially really liked, I think the best twist they've done all season is absolutely the one where someone gets to choose either to send somebody a steal a vote or a safety. Someone gets to will somebody an advantage of a steal a vote or a safety without power, and that person then gets to play it. And, if they play it, that ends up affecting the tribal. Even if they're not involved in that tribal, they give it to that person secretly. I think that is a really cool twist, and that's probably the only one that they've done this season that I think this was actually a really cool idea. This came at the right point in the game. It actually did make things relatively interesting. It certainly played a huge role in the way this endgame has gone. But aside from that, I just feel like there has just been way too much of a focus on, what are all these crazy twists that we can implement to really mess with the round and make things more exciting, when again, I feel like there's so much great just natural conflict happening. You don't need to force all these advantages to keep things exciting, and I think for me that really has been my main issue. But still, I've enjoyed this season. There's a lot that I still really do like. It just, again, some of these episodes have been a bit frustrating just because it feels like there's too much focus on this player going on a journey or this player trying to, get their vote back rather than let's talk about what matters the most, which is the vote. What are the dynamics right now? Sometimes it's just been a little bit hard to track that, and I think that has somewhat hurt this season. But anyway, those are really my general thoughts, how I feel about the season overall. So let's just go ahead and talk more about who is left and really how we have gotten to this point. All right, so let's go ahead and start off talking about the first person that ends up going out since we've last discussed. And that is probably one of the most shocking boots of this entire season. Like, if you would have come to me and said in episode 1 that this person was going to be one of the first few boots, I would have said there's no possible way. This person has such a good edit. This person's going so far. This person is in such a good position on their tribe, and clearly was not the case. It's Aysha, and yeah, it's pretty shocking. It's pretty devastating, not gonna lie, because I was really pulling for Aysha, not just as a big RHAP fan, but also in terms of just her edits on this season, I think was really good. I really like what we saw with like her and Teeny. I thought that was gonna be a legitimate like force to watch out for, like the two of them working together, no one knowing that Aysha was a part of RHAP except Teeny, them keeping that a secret. I thought we were going to have like a Siri and Izzy dynamic, and clearly that was not the case. Now, it doesn't really start out that way, because as we know, at the end of episode 2, it pretty much seemed like the second that this tribe that I really thought was not going to go to tribal. I thought Lava was pretty strong. I thought that they were in a spot where they were going to be that tribe that just never ended up going. So the fact that they did, I was like, okay, it's Rome's time to go. It's pretty obvious it's Rome's time to go. They spend so much of this episode just showing him hyping himself up, talking about how good he is at catching fish, how good he is at doing this for his tribe, how, you know, he just loves hyping himself up constantly, and it's driving everybody absolutely insane, and it really does seem like Rome is going to be the one to go, and it seemed like that was going to be the case here, but then Rome ends up going on a journey, and this ends up being a pretty crucial journey for Rome, because it gives Teeny a lot of time to think, and I really do think that Teeny is the reason why this ended up happening. Essentially, Rome ends up going on this journey, ends up winning a steal a vote, lies to everybody except Teeny about it, and Teeny's now at a point where it kind of seemed like Rome was going to be the vote, but now knowing that Rome has this steal a vote and wanting to keep Rome on their good side, they now know that they have this opportunity to work this alliance with like Rome, Kishan, and Genevieve, which we'll talk about that in a little bit actually. Maybe the worst possible move that Teeny could have made at this point. At the time it seemed like it was okay, because Teeny's kind of dead set in the middle here, and Teeny knowing that Rome also has an idol made it seem like they still want to, they kind of want to vote with, they would still want to work with that four, but it still doesn't necessarily seem like Aysha's gonna go, because Rome is now more set on Sol. Feels like Sol's the more dangerous player. Sol has a better chance of getting an idol and doing something to, put a wrench into his plans. So he is much more now focused on Sol. So it's like, okay, maybe Aysha's gonna be Aysha's gonna be fine here, but the problem is Aysha does not want to vote Sol. She instead wants to turn her vote towards Genevieve, who I thought was gonna end up being the boot here. I thought for sure this is where Genevieve was going to go. Genevieve was incredibly purpled at this point, just really not shown a lot in this show, and it just really seemed like it was going to be a matter of time before Genevieve was going to leave. Unfortunately, the votes are not there to get out Genevieve, because Teeny wants to go forth with this four with Genevieve, Kishan, and Rome. So as a result, it now really ends up being between Sol and Aysha, and again, I thought it was just going to end up being Sol here. It, again, similar to Genevieve, not really shown all that much. There were moments with Sol where he was shown a bit more. We do start to get a bit more of the Sol and Rome rivalry at this point, but we get to the tribal, and Rome plays his idol, and it ends up being Aysha here, who still ends up voting for Genevieve, and yeah, just very shocking the way this played out. Now, let's talk about Aysha a little bit. Do I think that Aysha did anything to really put herself in this spot? Not really. I honestly think Aysha played the game to the best of her ability. She didn't know that this four-person alliance existed. She didn't realize that that Teeny was as in good with Genevieve and Rome as they really were. I think really her only mistake is her unwillingness to vote for Saul. She seems completely against that idea. She wanted to go she wanted to go towards Genevieve. She's even told to vote Saul, but she doesn't really want to do that because she doesn't want to keep Genevieve and Rome together. She's so fixated on splitting those two up, and I do think that makes sense. For her game, it didn't make sense to get rid of Saul, but I do think that she needed to recognize it was either going to be her or Saul, which I think is also, like, somewhat Teeny's fault, but I understand the Teeny's also kind of in the middle, so you can't necessarily blame them for that. Really, I think it just comes down to the fact that, like, the worst possible circumstances ended up happening for Aysha here. Saul, Rome got an idol when I think, everyone was least expecting him to, and it seemed like he was going to be the one to go, but then he got the idol and then he didn't. So again, like I said, I thought it was going to be Genevieve, but then there's this 4-person alliance that Teeny feels like Rome, racking up these advantages, got to keep Rome on my good side, so now they're going to go towards there, and he's just not included in that, and neither is Saul, and it kind of, I think, just came down to the fact that Aysha was more unwilling to do what Teeny wanted versus Saul. So yeah, I think that's really what ends up happening here. I think it really sucks the way it played out. I think Aysha had so much potential as a player. I would really love to see her again. I think that honestly, I think that she really just kind of got set on the wrong tribe here. I think if she was on Gata or Chuku, I think honestly she might have ended up doing a lot better. But also, again, you kind of have to just play with the cast that you have. And I think, again, Aysha did all she really could. I don't think that I think that she definitely showed a lot of potential here. I don't know if she showed her full potential, considering I think that her rivalry towards Rome, it kind of clouded the rest of her game, and just as a result, I think she just wasn't able to see the dynamics in front of her. But it does really suck to see Aysha go. I was really pulling for her. I thought she was in a really good spot, but she does end up leaving, and again, it really does end up being a pretty crucial vote out towards the rest of how things end up playing out when it comes to Lavo. Alright, so now let's talk about the next episode, which of course results in the demise of Kishan, and probably one of the most, I think, surprising of the entire season. I know I just said that about Aysha, but even more so with Kishan. I mean, the way this episode starts off, it seems like it's going to be Sol. There is a clear feud that has really ignited between Sol and Rome. Rome is someone who, he is incredibly cocky. He is someone who is just, feels like he's running his tribe. But he also has this magnetism. He's drawing everybody in. Everybody wants to be his best friend. Everybody wants to work closely with him. But Sol is the one to see through that. Sol can see the bullshit. Sol can see exactly what Rome is trying to do. And as a result, the two of them are at each other's throats. And this was a really fun rivalry to watch, but it seemed like it was going to come to a head in this episode, because the two of them just are pretty much at a point where they just do not want to work with each other. They don't want to talk to each other. Rome, it literally tells Sol straight out in this ultimatum where he's like, hey, I'm going to use my steal a vote on you if you do not give up your shot in the dark. Sol's like, fuck that, I'm not doing that, I'm not going to, just do what you're telling me, I'm not just gonna, like, give in to what you're telling me to do, and it just further ignites the rivalry between them. So again, it seemed like because of the fact that these two were so, like, at each other's throats, it just seemed like an inevitability that they were going to be the one to go. You even have talks of it at first being Sol, but then Sol kind of convinces Teeny that why don't we just go for, Sol kind of convinces Teeny that, like, why don't we just go for Rome here? That might just be the move. Teeny even starts to think that maybe just going for Rome might be the move here, and so it seems like maybe that's what's gonna happen. But then the most unexpected thing on Lavo that could potentially happen ends up happening here, because suddenly Genevieve, who, as I said before, has been almost completely a non-entity on this tribe for the past 3 episodes, made it seem like she was going to be, like, the next person voted out. I thought for sure she was going to be, like, collateral damage towards Rome or something to do with this alliance. Suddenly now starts to become the most important character on her tribe, because she starts to recognize that, wait a second, Rome is going to go, and Rome is the person that is going to be eliminated here. Soul's like pushing in that direction. Teeny seems somewhat on board with it. Kishan also is on board. It seems like they have the votes to take out Rome, but then Genevieve recognizes that, wait a second, there's actually something I can do here, and instead wants to target Kishan. And the reason that she's able to do that is because this is one of those instances where Teeny has lost their votes and can't do anything. So as a result, Genevieve comes up with an idea. She goes to Rome, tells him straight out that he is going to be voted out and that they have to go for Kishan. And this made for one of the most unpredictable tribals, I think, in the entire season, because I truly did not know what was going to happen here. It seemed pretty clear that Rome wanted Soul, but then Genevieve's kind of telling him that, like, you need to go for Kishan. But I didn't think that Rome was actually going to go in that direction. Rome's a very stubborn player. He very much is like, it's his way or the highway. That's kind of how he's played the game up to this point. He's been complacent is not a word I would use to describe him at all. He is very much someone who wants to be in the driver's seat every single time, and so it just didn't seem like he was going to budge. But then you also have Teeny, who again just went against Aysha, but then you also have the Kishan of it all, who I think has been playing a really good middle game. He's someone that everyone feels really tight with, but then clearly has rubbed Genevieve the wrong way, making it clear that, like, he has wanted her out and that she's not really on his side. And she has gotten word of this, and it really wasn't clear what was going to happen here. It seemed like Rome was still going to steal Soul's vote, unless Soul decided to not vote, for him this time. And essentially, that's what ends up happening. Soul does, in fact, not get to steal a vote. Rome plays the steal vote onto Kishan, and Kishan ends up going. And look, I mean, the thing I'll say right off the bat is really great job from Genevieve. I think this was generally a really great move from her. I think she did a great job of finding a way to give herself a bit more agency in a tribe where she had almost none. She was kind of just someone that was being controlled by everybody. Everyone was seeing her as like this pawn that they could just go for at any point. But this really made it so she becomes this force to be reckoned with. She now has brought Rome closer to her. That's now the only person he trusts. Teeny now has to rely on Genevieve and Rome at this point. And then you also have and then you also have Soul, who's pretty much now on the outs, and it makes it so, he kind of has to, like, finagle away into there. It makes everything so much more difficult for everybody else in the tribe except for Genevieve, and I thought that this was just a really great move from her. But let's talk about Kishan, who I thought was absolutely going to make a deep run. I mean, I thought that he just did a great job of playing this very understated but very effective social game to where it made it seem like he was kind of in he was in everyone's pocket. Everybody wanted to include him in something, and he also just had really good reads on his tribe. He completely understood the dynamics. He understood, how he was able to bring Rome closer. He was very close with Teeny. I think, again, it's similar to Aysha, where, like, the worst possible thing that could happen, which is his closest ally not having a vote, is what ends up happening, and that results in him leaving here. And I know I just talked about how people losing their votes, dilutes a lot of the momentum. In this case, I think it actually helped things because it made things a little bit more unpredictable. And it was also only one person losing a vote. It's better when one person loses a vote than when there's, like, 4 people that don't have a vote, which we'll talk about, that craziness. But the thing with Kishan is that I really do think it just became one of those things where Genevieve suddenly woke up at a time when Kishan needed her not to, and that's why he ended up leaving here. I think that he should be proud of the game that he played. I think that he did the best that he really could, but looking back, when I really think about his edit from a substance perspective, it does actually make sense for him to go here, because most of his content was surrounded the idea of how he wanted Genevieve out, how he felt that she was a big threat and someone that needed to go, how he was really close to Teeny. There wasn't a lot with himself. It was a lot of, like, this is going to, bring this person closer into me, and, there wasn't a lot surrounding specifically him. A lot of it was surrounding the other people around him. So it does kind of make sense for Kishan to go go here, but I mean, I think out of the people who left pre-jury, this is probably the one that is the most shocking that's not Aysha. I think Aysha's still pretty shocking to me the most, but I think that this one is the one where I'm like, there's no way that Kishan's gonna go. It's gonna be Rome after this, but no, Kishan leaves, and it's pretty crazy, and I think it really does play a pretty large part in the way the rest of the things end up going for Lavo in the merge, which we'll talk about. But overall, like, this was just such a crazy vote. I love the way this all played out. I thought this was definitely, like, in a season where there's been a lot of crazy blindsides, this was easily one of the most insane to date. Really great move from Genevieve, really crazy, really exciting stuff, and again, really kept things fluid and exciting. It felt like, again, it was really hard to predict what was going to happen from this point forward, and this really kind of gave us a sense of, like, not to count anybody out. Genevieve seemed like someone who was going to be purpled, and now I feel like that was kind of purposeful. They made sure that she didn't have a lot to do in those first 3 episodes, so we didn't see her as a threat. We saw her as someone that could have easily been, picked off, only for her to suddenly emerge at the time when we least expected. It's actually really good editing in that sense. So I was very impressed by the way they went about this, but also, again, for Kishan, was devastated, was very definitely sad to see him go. I really did enjoy, what he ended up providing to this show, but again, I think just the worst possible circumstances ended up happening, and that's why he ended up going. And this is also the last time that Lavo does end up going to Tribal in the pre-merge, but again, I think a really exciting one, and definitely one of the best Tribals of the entire season so far. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the last pre-jury boot, and that, of course, well, not pre-jury, but the last pre-merge boot, and that, of course, ends up being Anika, and this one, again, was pretty crazy the way this ends up shaking out, because Gata was kind of at a point where, similar to Lavo, I didn't think that they were going to go to Tribal anymore. I thought, like, okay, John's gone, Andy's really great challenges, we know Sam's good, like, everyone seems to be working on the same accord. It seems like everyone's kind of in good with each other, but there's a lot of tension going on, and I didn't think that it was going to be relevant until the merge. But then, right again, when we least expect it, like a lot of this pre-merge, it ends up being so much more relevant, and I really loved the way all of this played out. I don't love that it was at the expense of Anika. I'll talk about her, I'll talk about her in a little bit. But in order to get to how Anika left, we do need to provide a little bit of background here, considering we really haven't talked about Gata in a little bit. I'll kind of go back a bit in saying that, Andy was initially going to be the person to go at the end of episode 1. It very much seemed like that was going to be the case, but as we know, Sam has really made it his effort to try to bring in Andy closer, and he's been doing some really great work in doing so, to where Andy does feel closest to Sam and Sierra. The two of them are working very closely together, but then you have Sierra, who doesn't feel as good with Andy, and as a result, seems like Andy might still end up going, because there is this girls' alliance of sorts that has formed, and it really does seem like it's going to become a legitimate thing. But Sam ends up getting word of this alliance, and not from Sierra, but from Rachel, who, again, really says a lot about how well insulated Sam was. Might not stay that way, but at this point, at least, Sam is very well insulated, and I really did feel like he was in a good position to potentially win this game. So that ends up happening, but then there is another factor that I have not talked about, which involves the journey. The same journey that Rome ended up going on alongside Kyle. Kyle, and Rachel, they ended up going on this journey, and Anika ended up going on this journey. And Anika finds out some information that Kyle is kind of spreading about the fact that Sam and Sierra are very close, that he feels like they are in the center of everything, that they're kind of running things, and there's a rumor that, I don't remember who ended up bringing it up, it was either Kyle or Rome, but one of them bring up that they think that maybe Sam and Sierra might actually be a couple and that they're dating, and rather than, hold on to this information, Anika instead, directly confronts them about it in a sort of funny way, but it's enough to really get Sam to become very concerned. He starts to feel like Anika is coming after him. He's already been kind of irritated by Anika and just how much she wants to continually just lead things and always step up and show her skill sets. He's already shown that is something that kind of annoys him. So I feel like he's kind of been looking for a reason to go for Anika, and this just kind of further ignites that. But then, of course, that leads to this boot. Now, the question is, how do we get to this point? Because there are multiple factors at play that made it seem like maybe Anika wasn't going to go here. There's a conversation with Andy where Andy is very much loyal to Sam and Sierra at this point, but he wants to kind of try to cover himself on all sides. So he goes to Hannah, who's Hannah? He goes to Rachel and Anika, and they pitch the idea of going for Sam. They have no intention of actually doing it, but again, they want Andy to think that he's good, so they bring him into this idea of potentially voting out Sam. He obviously is not going to do that. He tells Sam that this is a possibility that's going to happen. But then you have the Sierra of it all. And Sierra is, while Sam is pretty tight with Andy, Sierra's really not. Sierra actually wants to pick one of the girls to go with Sam here and wants to kind of make that potentially just be a 4 and go for Andy. But Sam really does not want that to happen. He wants Anika to go. And so we get to the actual vote out. Anika at this point is feeling pretty confident that she's going to be fine. But we get to the vote outs, and, at this point I thought, okay, this is probably going to end up being a, 3-2 vote. You're going to have Sam and Andy vote for, Anika, and you're going to have Sierra you're going to have Sierra and Rachel and Anika all vote for Andy, and it's just not going to end up working out. But no, that's not what the edit has suggested. It wouldn't have made sense if it went in the direction, because again, things have been so focused on Sam and Andy that Andy survives, Anika goes, of course, and I think there's a couple factors at play here. One is that I think Anika was just far too confident in her positioning on this tribe, never really tried to question her spot. She always just felt like she was in a good position. She felt like Andy was someone who was still on the outs, and I don't think she ever recognized that he was starting to gain a bit more footing, and that's due to how well Andy was playing. Now, Andy playing well, not something you're going to hear me say very often. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but at this point, I think Andy did do a good job of managing his threat level, not showing that he had, moved up the ladder in any way, and so because of that, Anika kind of just felt okay. She thought that this was pretty obvious. She also felt confident that Sierra was going to end up sticking with the Girls Alliance, and obviously that did not end up happening. But I really do think, in my opinion, her biggest flaw in the game is her deciding to reveal the info that she got from her other tribe in the way that she did. I think instead she should have pulled both of them aside and just say that, like, hey, this is a concern of sorts. I'm good with you guys. I want us to stay loyal to each other. I really want us to, stick together. Regardless if she believed it or not, I do not think that Sam would have been as adamant on voting her out. I think he would have been more inclined to switch to Rachel, who he blindsides, of course. So if Rachel does end up, voting for Andy here, but ultimately, that's not how this ends up going down. I think she was just far too direct in what she really was trying to do. She made it pretty obvious to Sam that he was a target of hers, and so I really just think that compounded with the fact that Anika was just not in the spot she thought that she was in, that really just ended up hurting her here. But I also think that, really looking back, this is one of the most crucial vote outs of the entire season, and I'll talk about why a little bit later, but yeah, pretty shocking the way this all went down. I would have thought for sure that Andy was going to go, but again, it really just says a lot about how well he has been able to avoid becoming the target on his tribe, how he was able to get over that. I think the bonds he's maintained with Sam and the way that has been strong enough to, get him to not even receive a vote here, really just says a lot about it, which gets him to avoid leaving here. Again, it really just says a lot about how well positioned Andy has become, but also says a lot about how well positioned that Sam really was. So, yeah, again, Anika leaving, it's not entirely shocking because I do think between her and Rachel, she definitely did seem like the person that was more likely to leave. I thought that Andy, considering how well of a bond he had built with Sam and Sierra, it kind of seemed like that was going to be the case. There was a possibility that Sierra was just going to vote him out anyway because she did seem pretty annoyed by him. She didn't really like the bond that Sam had with him. She didn't really seem to want to work with him all that much, and so I was kind of surprised that she ended up doing that. But again, I think that just says a lot about the sort of just loyalty she felt towards Sam and how undyingly loyal she was towards him. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, for Anika, it's not entirely shocking when you think about how she played, but it is shocking that she ends up going in the way that she does. It also ends up being one of the biggest blindsides the entire season. She's just like so in shock about it. She feels she's so like betrayed by Sierra. She even calls out Rachel and asks if it was her, and Rachel makes it clear that she had nothing to do with it. And again, I think, really looking back, when we really look at the way the season has gone, this is by far one of the most important vote outs of the entire season. I think if Anika does not go here, there is a lot of things that do play out differently moving forward, and of course we'll talk about that when we get into the merge. But again, just a really exciting pre-merge all around. I think this was a great way to wrap things up, especially in a, basically would have been a season of blindsides. I really don't think there was a better way to set up the pre-merge here. You now had Rachel, who was kind of on the outs, and it seemed like Sam, Sierra, and Andy were just going to kind of run the table. When it came to Lavo, you had this really interesting narrative of Rome still kind of being consensus target, but maybe moving up a bit because of Genevieve, with Teeny and Soul now kind of on the outs and kind of now trying to have to figure out how to get their way in there. And then, of course, you have the Tuku, who has not gone to Tribal since TK, but you still have this growing rivalry between Sue and Kyle. So there was just a lot of interesting possibilities for how things were going to go moving forward. And I think, like I said, Anika leaving here really just so whatever was going to happen now was probably going to be a very exciting merge phase of the game. Just made it. I did also forget to mention, though, that this is another one of those instances where Anika ends up leaving without really having any agency of her own, because she was stripped of her vote from going on a journey, which again, it just really makes things a lot less exciting when the person who is leaving doesn't even really get to do much in terms of their vote. So it kind of made it seem kind of obvious that Anika was going to be the one to go. But then there's also the fact that there was this amulet that was in play that Andy had gotten alongside Caroline, and I believe Genevieve was the other person. I can't remember who the other person was. It was either Genevieve or Teeny. I can't remember which one. But basically, he had told his entire tribe about it, and the other reason they really wanted to keep him in was because they knew that keeping in all three of them, the amulet would, basically just remain not as powerful, and so they wanted to keep Andy around for that reason. So I don't really know if you needed the amulet, to be honest with you. And with the way it's played this season, I don't really know if we're going to see it again, just considering that I don't think that the amulet itself really plays that much of a role. I don't really think it changes all that much in the grand scheme of things, and I don't really know if they necessarily needed that. But those are just two things that I somehow forgot to mention that also kind of played a role in Anika leaving here. Okay, so now we've talked about all the pre-merge boots. Let's get into the merge here. And before I get into the actual merge boot, I do want to go just a little bit of a tangent here, talk about the whole merge phase of this season, because like I said, I think the pre-merge, they did a good job. Yes, we have the journeys and things like that, but most of these advantages were things that were used like that round and then not relevant after that, and I think that was definitely very helpful. Again, the merge phase, I think they're just doing a little bit too much. Starting off with just the mergatory in general, I think just kind of needs to be retired at this point, because we've now gotten to a point where essentially the first merge episode is, it used to be that we had like two teams and one was safe and one wasn't, and they all won immunity, and then they weren't eligible to be voted for, and then the other half, and then the other half also were immune and things like that, and they couldn't be, voted for, and then the other half could be voted for. But now we've gotten to a point where it basically is that we're not in two teams anymore. You still can pretty much vote for, everybody still can vote. It's not one of those instances where half of them just don't vote and don't do anything. half of them can't be voted for, but only one person is actually immune and therefore can't vote. So yeah, it really just seems like, at this point, like, just pure spectacle. It doesn't really feel like there's a reason to still have this twist in there because it doesn't really add to much in the grand scheme of things. But with that out of the way, get into the merge. The who ends up going in this episode really shouldn't be a huge surprise here, just considering that this person has been kind of hinted at as a possible boot for a long time, and that ends up being Rome, who, look, I mean, what an interesting story this guy has had on the show, to say the least, because, back in episode 1, kind of seemed like he was going to be the main person to go. Everybody was getting irritated by him, but then he ends up winning an idol at the point where everyone least expects him to, and then suddenly he starts picking up a bit of momentum, but then there's still this sense that maybe we're still going to go for him after Aysha leaves, and then he ends up sticking around, despite the fact that he has a few enemies on his side. And then Genevieve, inexplicably just starts being a lot more active in the game and ends up saving him. And so it seemed like heading into this merge, there was a possibility that he was maybe going to have a second life. And no, that's not the case. Rome is just such an utter mess of a player. He's pretty much just like trying to, cause all this chaos. And he's not doing it in a subtle way. He's doing it as if he is the person that's immune and that he can't be voted out. But the thing is that you can be voted out, and this is also your first impression with a good majority of these people, and just knowing how this is usually going to play out, you would think that Rome would be a lot more careful with what he's doing, but already, I mean, he really just puts himself in a really bad spot here. Multiple people are really wanting him out at this point, and you can already see that being an issue. There is a, dinner of sorts that the ones that end up immune, they end up having, and they basically all pretty much agree on going for Rome, although they think that potentially Andy might be a good backup, which we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that ends up being a little bit more relevant than we think. And Rome decides to kind of just go about this in the most messiest way possible, because he really wants Kyle to go. And I think what ended up happening here is that Rome thought that what he was doing on his original tribe would somehow still work on a merge tribe when there's so many more people. There's like 13 or 14 of them left, and that somehow they're not going to compare notes. But that's exactly what ends up happening. He goes to Kyle, he's like, hey, who do you think is like a really big threat? Kyle brings up Tiyana and Sol and like tries to get them to target Kyle, but then he's telling Kyle that Tiyana said his name, so it's just a whole utter mess of what he's trying to do. And then even after all that, even though Kyle is safe at this point, Rome's not done. Rome is still going to try to plant some seeds against someone else, and really, it's the person that you shouldn't be surprised that he's targeting. He's once again trying to target Saul here, despite the fact that him and Saul seem like maybe they, had reconciled their differences and they're willing to move forward in the game. He still decides to go for Saul, starts pushing the fact that, like, Saul is, like, bullying people and saying all this stuff and making it seem pretty clear that, and feeling just confident that Sol is going to go and that he doesn't have to do anything and that he's just going to leave. And I think that's really what comes down to Rome's real demise. I think his cockiness absolutely is the biggest thing to consider here. I think the fact that Rome was just so sure that things were going to go his way and that he didn't have to do anything, it's kind of poetic, because the edit is like very much clowning on him the entire time. They literally started off the episode with him doing his own recap. There's a moment where he talks about how, like, things are just gonna go his way no matter what. So again, I mean, I think that the edit is really funny here, but it also just makes sense for Rome to go at this point. He had been a consensus vote for so many rounds now. It just really was only a matter of time before he was going to go here. It doesn't make for the most exciting first merge episode, because it does seem pretty obvious how this is going to play out, but again, just seeing that whole demise go down, seeing what ended up happening, it really did feel like this was going to open up the game in a pretty big way. Having Rome gone, now there's other people we can focus on, and we can kind of see the direction that things end up going from this point forward, but also what damage was done from the lies that he was spreading. Is there stuff that people are going to start being a bit more receptive to with Rome gone? that was something else to really consider. So again, it's not the most shocking, vote out in the world, and in some ways, I do kind of wish Roman stuck around, but maybe not, considering that he has since gone on to just, like, cause all this chaos on social media, saying that, like, Kyle's saying something that, said something disparaging about, like, Sue and Caroline that we don't have any evidence about, and no one has even said what Kyle had said. So who knows if that's true. There's, like, beef he's gone into with Gabe. The two of them are just constantly going back and forth and not liking each other. There's this whole thing with him posting a potential real boot list, and that's really become an issue. So yeah, honestly, maybe it's good that they got rid of Rome when they did, because it just seems like he's been causing a lot of chaos since then. But overall, definitely a very fun character to watch, a very unpredictable character, played much differently than I kind of expected him to, but I do think that it was very fun to watch him just kind of again, just have this ego of sorts that was so confident that things were going to work out for him, and then just seeing that downfall happen. I mean, that's just, again, classic Survivor right there. So it was very fun to get to watch here, and I think did kick off what ends up being a pretty fluid merge for the most part. Okay, but now is where we really get to the exciting stuff with the next boot here, which really I think is one of the more surprising ones. But honestly, maybe shouldn't be, because but I think just based on the way things were laid out, let's just get into it, because this usually, in the new era, this is now the time where we have the Murgatory episode. Okay, now it's time for the divide everybody into two teams, essentially, and you're gonna have both of them go to tribal. It's gonna be a double tribal, but one of them is gonna go on the current beach, the other one will go on, like, one of the previous camps. This time it's the Lavo camp, and it seemed like that's what this episode was going to be, but no, they did something completely different here, where, yes, they divided them into two teams, but the team that won essentially just doesn't go to tribal. They're safe, and they're just, kind of chilling. And I didn't really know how that was all going to go, but that then leaves us with the tribe that seemed to be the least interesting, because you had basically all of Tuku divided onto the same tribe, but then you also had Rachel, who of course is not a part of Tuku and seemed like the obvious vote here. So it kind of seemed like that's the direction that things are going to go in, but oh my god, no, we have probably one of the best advantages that I've seen in any season of the seasons I've covered of Survivor, which again, remember, is only 41 through 46, so it's not really saying much. So it might not be the most accurate, opinion, but I thought that this was still really cool regardless, where basically Saul notices that there is some sort of advantage, and he ends up finding it, and basically it is an advantage where essentially he is able to will a player steal a vote or a safety without power. They get to pick which one that they do, but they have to do it publicly that night, and that will end up affecting the vote. And, well, what'd you know, he ends up giving this to Rachel. Rachel ends up playing the safety without power, and now it comes down to the Tuku 4, who, again, I have not talked about in a really long time, because Tuku has pretty much been chilling up to this point. Like, I haven't had to go to tribal since losing out on TK, and so because of that, we just haven't really talked a lot about the dynamics going on there. And so what was cool about this is that we kind of get to see what would have happened if they did end up going to tribal, and what really led to, and what would have gone down had they have gone to tribal, who would have ended up being the one to go. And of course, we get to the vote. It does end up being Tiyana, but how did we really get it to be Tiyana? Because honestly, this seems kind of perplexing. You have Tiyana, who is somebody that didn't necessarily seem like a really big threat, but the problem is Tiyana is up against a 3, because even though Gabe played his idol, in episode 2, it's not really had that much of an impact on him. If anything, it's only brought him closer to Sue and Caroline. The three of them are pretty much a solidified trio at this point, and they're not going to gun for each other. And then you have Kyle, who, yes, is a target, but he just keeps winning immunities, and he seems kind of impossible to go after as a result. So Tiyana ends up being the vote out here, and I think it really just comes down to the fact that she was so incredibly vocal about how much she wanted to go after Gabe and how much of a threat he was, and I really don't think any of that is her fault. So, like, well, yeah, so I'm kind of conflicted about this one, because I love the moment where Rachel plays that safety without power and, you know, ends up safe, and, you know, basically the Chuku then has to vote for each other. That is just such a great Survivor moment. That's everything we hope to see during Tribals, and I think that it really opens things up in such an interesting way. And, you know, for Rachel in particular, this is probably the best thing that could have happened to her this season, because, one, she would have absolutely been voted out, but also, well, we'll talk about that, but let's just say that this is definitely the beginning of things dramatically turning around for Rachel. So I love that, but I don't necessarily love that Tiyana was the one to go here, because I just don't think, in my opinion, she was that much of a threat. Yes, I do think she was very much gunning for Gabe, but aside from Gabe, I don't really think that affects everybody else. I think, you know, for Sue and Caroline, they would have had to get rid of Gabe at some point. Yes, Kyle, I don't think this is great for, because him and Gabe were pretty close. But, you know, she wanted to work with the girls, and the girls kind of solidified that this was going to be a thing, which, again, whenever you see an episode start out with, like, the girls saying we're going to stick together, something is going to happen to ruin that. And I've just come to realize that in Survivor. Whenever an episode starts off that way, that's not going to stick, and that really does end up being the case here. But again, I also think it just comes down to the fact that Tiyana just wasn't in a great spot here. I think if she was with literally anybody else, I don't think she ends up being the vote. I think it just comes down to the fact that, like, her tribe clearly did not trust her. Her tribe was not willing to let her get far enough. And also, I think Kyle winning once again really end up hurting her, because I do think if Kyle doesn't win immunity, I do think Kyle maybe goes here. I think everyone kind of figured that, like, he was going to be a threat. He's going to have to go at some point. So, yeah, really sucked to lose Tiyana here. I actually do think that out of the vote outs this season, this is probably one of the most sympathetic, because I don't really feel like Tiyana did a lot to get herself voted out at this point. I think it really just came down to the fact that, like, there were so few numbers. You have that 3 that's not going to turn on each other. You have Kyle that's immune, so where does that leave them with? It had to be Tiyana at that point. And, you know, Sue and Caroline, they just weren't willing to go for Gabe yet, and that's ultimately what ended up happening here. So, sucks that it went down, because, you know, I really like Tiyana, but such a great play from Rachel, and really, again, just makes things a lot more interesting, because now you have the 4 on Tuku, who kind of seems solidified, and it doesn't really seem like they're going to go after each other, but then that also changes things up dramatically for Rachel, who was someone that was probably going to end up leaving, and now obviously that ended up not being the case. So yeah, I mean, again, I think it's easily one of the best episodes of this season. I thought it was just so exciting to see how it all went down. You know, also really great for Saul. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But, you know, Tiyana going, really did feel bad for her. She definitely did seem pretty blindsided. I think it was probably one of the most dramatic vote outs of the season. Not quite on the level of Anika, but definitely similar in the sense where, like, she was really thrown by the fact that she was voted off here. But again, you know, we had a really legendary play, so I think that alone just really helped making it that much more effective. I just really wish personally that this was just a little bit more of an exciting vote out, because Tiyana going, it doesn't really change that much in the grand scheme of things. You still have Gabe and Sue and Caroline, who are 3, but now they're kind of known as a 3, so there's that. But then you also have Kyle, who's just winning immunity after immunity. Getting rid of Tiyana doesn't really change things all that much, whereas going for Gabe would dramatically change things at this point of the game. I'm also not really a Gabe fan. There's just the way that he has kind of, you know, been so adamant that, like, things are going to go his way. I've just not really been a big fan of. But then there's also the fact that I think that, you know, he was just such a bigger threat on his tribe. It just kind of made sense for him to go here. But again, Love the play from Rachel. Just really sucked that we had to lose Tiyana in the way that she did, because I think she definitely had a lot more potential moving forward. So even though, like I said, I was a really big fan of the last twist of the previous episode, and not a huge fan of the actual vote out, big fan of, like, you know, what Rachel did, but not a big fan of the actual vote out, this next episode might be my favorite of the season so far. Generally, everything that ends up going down here, I thought was just incredible. And look, I'll get into it right now. This is the elimination of Sierra, and a very satisfying one at that. Just the way all of this ends up going down, I think, is really well edited, really well handled, and really did feel like this just kind of made sense with the way the game was going. Basically, you know, you have this moment where it seems like, despite the fact that Sam and Sierra are such a well-known duo, you also have Andy, and now Rachel basically now has had a second life of sorts. Gata is in a really good spot, and they have decided that they are going to try to align with Avo, have essentially now decided to team up. There's 3 of them, there's 4 of Gata. Why not just go ahead and team up with each other? They're going to go ahead and try to take out all the Tukus, because they are such a well-known, they have made things so easy to track in that dynamic. They know that Sue and Caroline and Gabe are really tight, and they also know that Kyle is really good with them. They want to try to take out Gabe or Kyle, and it seems like that's the direction that things are going to go. But then Caroline really ends up working her magic here, and I think really ends up being kind of the reason why things end up shifting in the way that they do, because Caroline really makes it seem pretty obvious that why are we trying to work with Gato when we should instead just try to work with Lavo? They have such a known target on their back, and instead tries to direct the target to one of Sierra or Sam. This also complicates things when Sue ends up winning immunity, and as a result, now the Tukus are in a position where they can still control the votes. So now it's all about, you know, we need to go ahead and target one of them. It seemed like for a minute it was going to be Rachel, but Sol really does a great job of directing the target off of Rachel, and especially because he does let Rachel in on the fact that he ended up saving her, and so he ends up deciding to, you know, get the target off of her and now steer it towards Sam and Sierra, who would become such a known duo at this point, which also kind of seems like a no-brainer because Sam cannot vote at this tribal, so there really isn't much that he can do at this point other than to just hope that it's not going to be him and that they're going to be fine. But we get to the actual votes, and this is probably, you know, regardless of if this is my favorite episode of the season, this is by far my favorite tribal council of the season. Like, no question about it. I love the way this tribal ends up going down, because you have Rachel here who is really unsure as to what is going to happen. So, you know, she has 2 possible things that she can do. She has a shot in the dark, but she also has recently obtained an idol, so she decides to play her shot in the dark here just to see if the target was going to be directed onto her. She ends up not playing her idol, which I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but such an incredible move. Maybe, I think, the best move of the entire season with what she ends up doing here, and probably, I think, the best handling of shot in the dark that we have seen on this show to date. Which I'll talk about, but we get to the actual vote, and it ends up being a tie between Sam and Sierra. And the funniest part to me about all this is that Sierra is actually the reason why this vote ends up tying, because she ends up voting Gabe, whereas Sam and Sierra, whereas everybody else votes for one of Sam or Sierra. So the vote ties. Sierra still is able to vote because Sam has lost his vote, and Rachel also can't vote because of the shot in the dark play. So it comes to a tie between them, with Sierra ultimately, like I said, being the one to leave. And look, I mean, in my opinion, this really was a long time coming. And look, I really was enjoying Sierra for the first couple episodes of this season. I just think that she really did not play that great of a game, if I'm being honest. I think the second that she got close with Sam, it kind of made it so she felt like this had to be her ride or die when there were plenty of opportunities where she could have, kind of taken the game into her own hands. I do think initially not telling Sam about the Girls Alliance was definitely the right move, but then deciding to vote off Anika when the votes were there to vote off Andy, who she never really wanted to work all that closely with, I don't understand why you don't just go ahead and pivot, and why you don't just go ahead and vote out Andy there. Why did you sacrifice Anika, who I don't think was ever going to target Sierra? I think that Anika felt really good with Sierra. I think those three would have been in such a good spot. Let's say that Rachel, still ends up in the same position that she's in. I think that Rachel, Anika, and Sierra are a very tight three at that point, and also aren't exposed as one. I think that they're in a really good spot moving forward because now they voted off Andy, and then they can just go ahead and go for Sam, and then you still have Sam and Sierra as a known duo, but Sierra has a way to pivot. Sierra has people backing her that are going to make it so she will not be the person voted out. Instead, Sierra gets rid of a number that could have been on her side, and as a result makes it so now Sam is the one that has more connections because Andy's better with Sam than Sierra was. He's put in much more effort with Andy at that point. And then you also have Rachel, who at this point, can't vote. But if you had Anika there instead, then it would have been Sam that ended up going. So yeah, ultimately, I really just think Sierra ended up doing this to herself. And then once the merge started, she really did not do a great job of trying to pivot things in a direction that helped her. It always included Sam, and I feel like she needed to recognize that she needed to back away from Sam. And Andy correctly recognizes this because Sam kind of throws Andy under the bus during the Rome vote, and Andy recognizes that he needs to go ahead and go against Sam and Sierra. Now, I'll talk about whether or not I think that was a good move for Andy in the long run, but that's another reason why Sierra ends up going here, because Sam very much was against them at this point, and I think that coupled with Soul, and also the fact that, like I said, I think Sierra just got really complacent as a player, just believing that things were, and I feel like this is a big commonality between the season, just players thinking things are going to go their way no matter what. I think it wasn't so much that with Sierra, it was just that she didn't seem to want to pivot, and I think she really needed to, and I think the way she needed to do that was by being willing to vote off Andy, and being willing to actually make a move, and being steadfast with Sam that no, Andy has to go, Anika's gonna be more loyal to us, but because she didn't do that, that's really why she ultimately ended up going here. So it kind of was like really satisfying to watch, because it feels like Sierra really did do this to herself. She is, of course, the first juror, and also should be noted, similar to, has basically the same exact fate as Kelly in 45, where Kelly ends up buying a margarita during the auction and then gets voted off the same episode. So I think the margarita curse is very much a real thing. So if you're in the auction in a future season, do not go for the margarita. Even if you want to go for the margarita, do not go for the margarita, because you will likely be voted off if that is the case. But yeah, what a crazy exit this was. Just seeing the way that Sierra went out. A really great first juror as well. I think if you're gonna kick off the jury, I think Sierra being on the jury is a really good way to start things off here. So yeah, like I said, I think that there have been some pretty great episodes at this point, but this might handily, I think, be the best one so far, especially with the way everything ends up shaking out. But then that leads to probably, I think, one of the more disappointing episodes of the season, and that is the demise of Saul, who, I gotta say, really, when it comes to this one, there is nobody else to blame for this except for Genevieve, because I don't think Saul really does a lot to put the target on himself here. Yes, I do think Saul makes no mistake as to who he wants to go, makes it pretty, once again, they want to take a shot at Kyle, and it doesn't happen because Kyle does win immunity. There's a moment where it seems like the tide is going to shift to Gabe, but then Gabe ends up winning immunity instead, and they have a point, they have a chance at this point to take a shot at Kyle if they want to. They can easily go for him right now, and it seems like maybe that is what's going to happen, that Kyle is going to be the one that they can take a shot at. But for some reason, Genevieve doesn't want to do that. Genevieve is set on the idea of it has to be Rome because it has to be Saul because of him voting out Rome and putting, and sending him out. She needs to get revenge for that, even though really does not affect her that much in the grand scheme of things. She is so adamant about going for Saul here, and there's a moment where it seems like maybe things are going to shift. Sam does not really like this idea. He kind of wants to keep Saul in the game. He wants to shift it instead to it potentially being, he wants to shift instead to it potentially being Sue. There's even a moment where it seems like Sam's name is out there as well, and Saul kind of gives him the heads up that that's what's going on and that it's going to be Sam. But then Sam makes it, Kyle kind of gives the heads up that it's going to be Sam, but then it ends up not being Sam, and then it goes back to Sue. So there's a lot of possibilities here, and that's why, again, to me, this was disappointing. I would have loved to see, like, Sue go, for example, because, again, I think that really opens things up for Dooku, and I think that really changes the game quite drastically if you go in that direction with Sue going. If you take out Sam here, I mean, again, that changes things up in a big way. Sam is somebody who is very much on this revenge tour of sorts. He wants to, get vengeance for Sierra. He's willing to go for anybody right now, doesn't really care who he ends up hurting as long as it improves his game moving forward. And so I think taking him out is a really good move. You have Kyle, who, again, is someone that is just such an obvious person to go for at this point, considering that he has won so many immunities, and he is really starting to become a big threat in that way. Taking out Saul just doesn't really change that much. Yes, it frees up Teeny. You have Teeny kind of now alone and having to not really trust Genevieve at this point, but it doesn't really change that much in the grand scheme of things because Saul wasn't this big threat. I do think that had Saul gotten further, yes, he very much was in a position where he could have won the game. And I do think that Saul does play this game to the best of his ability. He makes it very clear who he's loyal to. He does a good job of sticking loyal to those people. I think easily his best move in the game is what he does for Rachel. I think those two moving forward could have had a really solid alliance, but unfortunately that doesn't really end up working out because Saul's name is out there at that point. There really wasn't much that Rachel could do, and there also, again, were just so many names floating out there. They even have like a live tribal where there were just so many possibilities. I do also somewhat blame Teeny here because they are so adamant on Kyle needing to be the one to go. They don't want to go for Sue, and as a result, it ends up shifting from Sue to Saul, where Saul ends up going. So yeah, I mean, it's disappointing because I really did grow to like Saul on the show. I think while, yes, the first couple episodes he wasn't really doing much, he proved to be just one of the best characters of this entire season. He was so much fun to watch. He was I think played a really decent social game. He just wasn't able to make the long-lasting connections that he really needed to, and unfortunately he pissed off somebody that really just held this grudge and couldn't seem to move past it and didn't want to move past it, and as a result he ends up going here. So again, I think this is just kind of a frustrating circumstance where, to me, the fact that we had this live tribal and there were just so many names being floated out there, the fact that it just went back to Saul, which I think was probably not the path of least resistance for everybody. I think that this definitely was not the greatest move for quite a few people, but ends up going in a direction that I think just wasn't as exciting as if it would have been, say, Kyle or Sue. It just really ended up being a little bit more underwhelming. I also talked about, like I said, how I thought this episode was pretty overblown. This is the one where like 4 people lose their vote. Caroline is the only one to officially lose her vote, which that's another reason to go for Sue. Caroline literally can't vote here, and you know that Caroline and Sue are close. You vote Sue out, and then you deal with the mess later of how that's gonna go. And then that also brings Kyle in closer because you don't have this Sue and Kyle back and forth constantly. But either way, Saul ends up going. Definitely a bit of a disappointment because, like I said, I really did enjoy him on the show. I thought he was just a lot of fun to watch, and I do think, like I said, I think he was someone that had a lot of potential moving forward, but unfortunately it was just one of those instances where Genevieve threw him out, and people just couldn't seem to come to any other consensus as to what they wanted to do, and as a result, he ended up leaving. So, yeah, definitely a bit unfortunate considering the way things shook out, but again, it made things very interesting moving forward for what was going to happen. Now we get to one of the more exciting episodes of the season, in which it does result in Gabe finally being voted out, and again, similar to Sierra, I feel like this one was a long time coming. I feel like this was just something that we have been hearing about for episodes now, so it just kind of made sense that it was going to finally go in this direction, but the journey to getting there was a very exciting one because there was a lot of players in this episode that have different agendas. You have Teeny, who her main goal at this point is to get revenge for, going after Soul. She is very adamant that, like, Genevieve, you have Teeny, who, like, their main goal at this point is to avenge Soul. They are very pissed at Genevieve for blindsiding them in the way that they did, and they really want Genevieve to go as a result. Rachel also is, like, very adamant about targeting Genevieve. She feels like Genevieve is a really big threat for her and someone that really does have to go. But then we get to the actual immunity challenge, which does result in Kyle once again winning immunity, and at that point, it really just comes down to the fact that Gabe is somebody that they're not going to be able to take a shot at again, whereas they feel like Genevieve is someone they can go for at any points. You also have Sue, who is very adamant that Kyle needs to go because Kyle wrote her name down, and she feels like Kyle has to go as a result of that. And like she's like really, she's been harboring this sort of grudge against Kyle for a while, and now is like really wanting to make it happen, and you really see that starting to come into play here, that she really wants it to be Kyle as a result because he wrote her name down, but everybody else pretty much wants it to be Gabe, and the vote does end up being Gabe here, and a very exciting vote, I think, the way this all ends up going down, where it does seem like there's a point where, like I said, Sue's adamant on Kyle going, but then Kyle wins immunity, and so she switches it to Genevieve, and everybody else pretty much does end up voting Gabe here. Gabe, of course, is also left on the outs, and like I said, I really do feel like this vote was a long time coming. For multiple episodes now, they've been saying that, like, Gabe is a threat, Gabe is someone that needs to go, and that's very much been the case. Gabe has been in a really good position when it comes to Tuku. He's the reason why Sue and Caroline have stuck with him. He has made it pretty adamant that he wants to go to the end with them. Now, it does kind of seem like he was doing that because he was underestimating them, and Caroline does correctly notices this, that like, oh, this guy is not working with me because he wants to work me. He's working with me because he thinks he can beat me at the end, and I'm going to show him otherwise. So I think that was definitely a big factor. I think the people that he chose to work with, he just didn't do a great job of making it seem like he respected their game. A lot of the time coming off as very patronizing, as if he is the reason that they're going to get there, not because of anything that they're doing, but because of what he's doing, and I think that really did end up hurting him. But I also think he just had such a big threat level. He was such an obvious target for so many rounds, and it just comes down to one of those things where, like, when you have the option to go to take that shot, you might as well just go ahead and take that shot there. Again, I thought that this was just a really exciting vote, the way this all played out, because there did seem like there were possibilities that it was going to shift in different directions. But Gabe ultimately does end up going out here. I've come to not really become much of a fan of Gabe, especially based on, like, tweets I've read and things like that. I've really not been a big fan of his. And also, again, I don't really love the way that he played. I think that he was so loyal to Sue and Caroline, which is great, but it just doesn't feel like he had much of a plan beyond that. He did try to get in with Kyle, but then was, like, saying things behind Kyle's back, was willing to cut him when I think he needed to stick closer to him. I think that he didn't really try to branch off and make other connections in the way that he should, and I think it just really made him more of a target as a result. So, not a particularly surprising vote out, but definitely one that, very similar to Sierra, was, like, very satisfying to see just the way everything went down here. So then that leads us to the most recent vote out of Kyle, and I will say this. I think when it comes down to the merge phase of the season, this was probably the least exciting episode that we've had, just because it went in such a predictable direction. There's not much that happens in this episode that is necessarily surprising. Everything that goes down here, I think we kind of expect to happen in the way that it does, where at this point, Kyle is absolutely public enemy number one. Everybody wants him to go, not necessarily because of anything he specifically did, but the fact that he's won so many immunity challenges and the fact that he is in such great, in a great position at this point. Like I said, you have Sue, who's adamant about getting him out. Caroline has just voted against Sue and kind of wants to make things right with her. You also have this alliance of sorts that is now formed that Kyle is outside of, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The only people really rallying for him at this point are Genevieve and Sam, and the problem is that Genevieve is the other name that is floating out there. There is a moment where it seems like maybe Genevieve's gonna go. Andy tries to pull something off. It doesn't really work out. Kyle is the one to be voted off. And like I said, there's just not a lot to talk about here in regards to Kyle, because this was just such a predictable moment. There really wasn't anything that happened in this episode that was really all that shocking. Kyle was going to be the vote, and then he ends up being the vote when he doesn't win immunity. Rachel ends up getting the immunity. Kyle does not win. It's like, why don't you you have to kind of just take the shot at Kyle at that point. You kind of don't really have any reason not to. The guy's won 4 immunities, which is the most, he's such a huge physical threat in that way, but he also is just a really nice guy that I think had really good jury management. I think his ultimate issue is that he just doesn't really have a strategic bone in his body, and I think that really is his biggest issue. There were moments where he showed that he was willing to be a bit more cutthroat, but he's really not that kind of player. He's really just kind of this nice guy who is willing to, work with whoever he needs to, but it just never really felt like he tried to do all that much. He really just kind of won challenges. He had this storyline of him being a vegan. He said, that Sue and Caroline were threats, and he was calling them Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Like I said, allegedly there might be something more that he said that Rome suggested, but we don't really know if that's the case. But other than that, there's just not really much to say about Kyle. I think, like I said, he seems like a nice guy. He seems like somebody that definitely put a lot of passion into the game, but I really don't feel like there is all that much to say other than the fact that because he just kept winning immunity after immunity, his target just kept increasing, and it just kind of got to a point where it's like, well, why are we getting rid of Genevieve when we can just go for Kyle? So really not much to talk about here. Kind of the most predictable direction possible. I don't really feel like there's really much to discuss, but ultimately that's really the direction that things go in, and yeah, so really not too shocking to see Kyle go. I'm honestly fine that he's gone now. I think that he was somebody that, again, fun to watch, but just didn't really give much in terms of substance. I don't really feel like there's a lot with Kyle that was relevant to the game, and I feel like he was somebody that I just never really saw as someone that could win. I heard people say that they thought he was going to win. I never really saw it. I always just kind of saw him as a guy who was winning challenges, and really I think by the end of this episode that really does prove to be the case. He just didn't really do a great job of having the hold on the game you need to. You can win as many challenges as you want, but you also need to have this sense of control, and Kyle just didn't really end up having that, and I think that ultimately is what ended up costing him here. Okay, so now that we have discussed everybody that has been voted off, let's talk about the final 7 that remain, because this is a very interesting final 7, I think. There's a lot of people here that I definitely did not expect to still be here, especially the fact that if you had told me right now that probably maybe the tightest duo of the season is Rachel and Andy, I would have said that's preposterous, because Andy tried to include Rachel and stuff, and it just didn't seem like it was going to work out. But I think we really got to talk about the fact that things have just shifted so dramatically in this season, and that's something I think that has been really exciting to watch. This is one of the few seasons that I've seen that really has taken a huge turn in such a different direction. There hasn't been a clear frontrunner the entire time, but I think these last 3 episodes, it is evident to me that the front runner of this season is absolutely Rachel. Just based on the way things have gone, whether it's the way that she was able to avoid Tribal by getting that safety without power and putting herself in this great position, but from there, we have just seen her really turn it on in terms of her game. The thing I like about Rachel is that she knows what she needs to do for her game, but she also is playing in a very strategic and adaptable way. She's always willing to include anybody. There's nothing that she isn't willing to do. She now has this alliance of sorts that really seems to be working out for her. She has Caroline and Sue, pretty much has replaced Gabe in that, where now they trust her, and Sue even brings up the point that, like, Gabe, told Sue about his idol initially, and now Rachel's told Sue about, her steal a vote that she ended up obtaining. And also is like, can we also talk about how Rachel is racking up advantages by the minute? Not only did she play her shot in the dark, but also getting an idol at the time when she needed it most and telling absolutely nobody about it. Rachel might be going in a scenario where she might never have to play that idol just because she is in such a strong position at this point. She's been able to, like I said, mend fences with Andy. The 2 of them are really close now, and she's in a really good spot with him moving forward. Teeny also really seems to trust Rachel because, unlike other allies, Rachel has been upfront with Teeny. Rachel has let Teeny in on what she is going to do, and as a result, they feel a lot better with Rachel than they have with other allies, and I think that says a lot about Rachel just really understanding this cast, knowing what she needs to do to get ahead and knowing how she can keep them on her side. She knows with Sue, she needs to preach loyalty and that Sue's playing this very emotional game and that she needs to make sure that Sue knows what she's doing. And she knows that if you're going to get Sue, you need to get Caroline. She really wants to get Caroline because I think her and Caroline are playing very similar games, but Rachel is just doing it better than Caroline because there's so much that she's doing that people don't realize that she's doing, whereas Caroline at the moment really is just kind of tight with Sue. But I do think that right now, I'll talk about Caroline a little bit, there are definitely things that Caroline's also doing very well. I just think that Rachel right now is absolutely the front runner to win this game. I mean, even like Saul and him letting her in on him being the one to save her, I think Rachel has just really become such a huge contender to win. I think Rachel has just really had such an upwards trajectory in the last couple of episodes, and I think it's really only going to continue to skyrocket. I mean, again, she has this alliance now that seems pretty locked, and if that alliance crumbles, I don't see Rachel being the one to go. I think Sue is probably the one to go. I think Andy is probably the one to go. I don't think Rachel even Teeny I think would go. I don't think Rachel is going to be the one to go there. In fact, I think she might be in the best position out of everybody right now. So yeah, it really just seems like she maybe is the front runner to win. For me, if you had to ask me what I think really got her to this point, it's not the safety without power. Obviously, yes, that did help her. I think what she did with her shot in the dark really was just such an incredible move. Her playing the shot in the dark, not because she thought that she was in a bad position, but to do it based on perception. She wanted to see what the reaction would be and if people would be upset or surprised at the fact that she played it, and then that would let her know if she needed to play her idol. And going from there to then not having to play her idol up to that point, I mean, it's just so impressive to watch. The way that she's been able to navigate this game and the way that she is just so level-headed, knowing that Genevieve eventually does need to go, but also knowing that the votes aren't there to take her out and there's no reason to take her out right now. I think it's just so impressive the way she has been able to maneuver from these couple rounds, and I've just been so impressed by her, and I cannot wait to see more of what she does do moving forward, because I really do think she is in just such a prime position to potentially win this game. But if it's not going to be Rachel, like, let's just say Rachel's not the person to win, I think the other person we really got to look at is Caroline, who I do think has played a really good game. I think the only thing that hurts Caroline for me is the fact that I don't think she's had a lot of personal content, but recently she's definitely had a lot more. She's talked about her ADHD. She's talked about, the fact that She is somebody that, really wants to be loyal to people, but also is looking out for her own game. And I also think she's made some really good moves. The way that she was able to get Sue back on her side, doing something that hasn't happened for many people. Most of the time, if you betray Sue, you've lost Sue, but Caroline has been able to reel her back in, I just think is really impressive. I think also the fact that Caroline has just done a really good job of staying in the know of what was going on, making sure that she's, maintaining connections. I just think she's done a really good job at playing this game so far, and I do think she definitely does have quite a decent shot of winning this game. I think the way that she was able to steer things in the direction with the Sierra vote in particular, I really do give her credit for that, because she was the one who kind of recognized, like, why are we going with Gata when we can go with Lavo? I think that was a really good move from her, and I think, again, her being in this position where she's kind of in a similar spot to Sam and Sierra, where like her and Sue were such a known duo, but nobody really wants to break them up. I don't think that's Sue's doing. I think that is absolutely the way that Caroline has been handling things, and I think that she is in just such a good spot to at least make it to the end. I don't see Caroline. I think the only way Caroline goes is if it's like fire making. I think that's generally the only way that Caroline ends up leaving, because as of right now, if Rachel does not win, I do think that Caroline is the winner of this season. So who would I put after Caroline and Rachel? Honestly, it's hard to tell, because everybody left, I just don't see winning the game. I just don't see it happening. Teeny is someone that I've honestly really soured on, just because I don't think that they have done a lot that has benefited their own game. A lot of their game has been putting trust in people and just believing that that is going to work out, believing that the way that they want to vote is how everybody else wants to vote, not really doing a good job of maintaining other connections. Yes, now they have this 5-person alliance, but that's not really their doing. That was more just something that like fell into their lap. And even on this last vote, they didn't want it to be Kyle initially. They wanted to be Genevieve. They've had this, grudge against Genevieve. And they've been very annoyed at Genevieve, and they haven't really been able to move forward. They also have just been left out of so many votes at this point. I just don't see Teeny making it there. I think Teeny is someone that is very easy to manipulate, and we've seen that throughout this entire season. They have been very easily manipulated, and I think the problem with Teeny is that they just haven't learned from their mistakes. They keep allying with people who either are at the bottom or people who don't have their best interests. And I think this alliance, it is good for Teeny, but I can also see them easily picking off Teeny. So I really don't think this is great. I think right now Teeny is probably going to make it to the end, but I don't really know. I don't think that they have a chance of winning. And it's disappointing, because I think the Teeny start off this game in such a strong position, but I think that the way things have gone moving forward, it just really has not worked out for Teeny. Losing Sol, losing Kishan, those were two big allies for Teeny that they really needed, and not having them in the game, they're kind of just on their own. They don't really have that one person that they can really trust. Yes, they have Rachel, but again, Rachel's good with everybody. Having Rachel on your side is not exactly a great thing, and I don't think that Teeny really recognizes that. So I don't really see things going great for Teeny. So those are really the 3 that I think are probably making it to the end. I think that's probably going to be the final 3 at this point. But if it's not them, we then have Andy, Sam, Sue, and Genevieve. And all 4 of them, I really don't think are playing very well at all. Let's talk about Sue, who I was definitely impressed by in the beginning of this game. I thought that she had a lot of agency. She was very good at like making connections on her tribe, but there were things that happened early on that I really think I should have seen as a sign that maybe Sue is not going to play very well. And I think I can absolutely say, after watching these last few episodes, that she just isn't a very level-headed player. She's an incredibly emotional player. She doesn't really seem to let go of anything, and I think that really is her biggest flaw, because of the fact that she is always harboring these grudges against players, a lot of which are not really that big of a deal. Like, yes, Kyle wrote down her name, but that's because that was the other name that was out there. She could have easily tried to clear things up with him. She had no interest in doing so. She just wanted Kyle to go. I think the same can apply apply to and not wavering from Gabe as well. I think was also a really big issue for her. I think she really needed to recognize that she needed to get away from that. Caroline recognized that she needed to do that, but that is not something that Sue was able to recognize that she needed to do, and I don't think that that was great. And I also think that, again, she just hasn't done a great job of really knowing when to pivot. She hasn't really pivoted much at all. And I think it's just made her a really big target. In fact, I think out of that alliance, I think Sue is the person I see going first. If they end up becoming that 5, if that is the final 5 of this game, I do see Sue being the person to go there. It really is not looking that great for her right now. Yes, it seems like to her, it's like her, Rachel, and Caroline. But again, Rachel can kind of just go anywhere. Caroline has broken off from Sue before. She could easily do it again. It just really is not looking great for Sue right now, so I don't really think that Sue is in a position to win the game. I think so much of her edit has been, again, focused on just her playing too emotionally, her focusing on things that really aren't that important at the end of the day, and I think that has definitely hurt her game. No, she hasn't had to play her idol, and there is that, but other than that, I just don't think that she has played all that well moving forward. But she is not the person that I think has the least chance at winning the game out of that 5. The person who absolutely, I think, has the least chance of winning, and then we'll talk about the people outside of that 5, is undoubtedly Andy, who, look, I'm very happy that Andy is still there. I think it's crazy that he was initially going to be the first person voted off on his tribe, and now he's still here. It's kind of like Emily from 45. But Emily was a much better player than Andy. Emily was very adaptable. Emily knew how to, save herself. Emily knew how to improve her social game. Everything that Andy does on this season, it seems like it's entirely his own doing. Like, everything he thinks he's doing, he's not really doing. I mean, every confessional we get from him, it's basically the same thing over and over again, where he's like, oh, I'm playing this game that's so multifaceted. I'm, hidden, I'm hiding in plain sight. Nobody knows that I'm doing the things that I'm doing. I'm this agent. I'm this master manipulator. He's throwing out all these crazy terms, and it's just like, that's clearly just not the game that other people are seeing. I think right now, if Andy gets to the end, I do not see the jury respecting his game. I think he's going to talk he's going to talk a lot about all these things that he did, but I don't think that's anything that he specifically did. Take this last episode, for example. Andy finds himself in a really good spot. He has this 5-person alliance. It seems like they can absolutely go the distance. He now has been able to repair things with Rachel. And moving forward, like, he kind of has the lay of the land. If he wanted to go to the end with Rachel, he absolutely could. She would definitely be willing to do that. But what does he decide to do? Instead of just saying, okay, we'll just let Kyle go, he is adamant on Genevieve being the vote, and even votes outside of his alliance, even though he knows that that's probably not going to be what's happened. But he, again, has convinced himself that he has been playing this great game, that he's just going to get his way, and that's just not really the case. So right now, like, it just isn't really looking great for Andy. Conversations that are had in this episode as well, it really just seems like they do not see him as a threat. Genevieve even mentions in this episode that, like, she wants to go for one of the more, I think she said, like, I think she said she wanted to go for one of the more, like, less impressive players, someone who's not really doing all that much, and she was very much looking towards Andy as that person. So yeah, really not great. And like I said, I like seeing how he's been able to evolve, but I don't think he's used that to his advantage. Him wanting to go after Sam and Sierra, that is not a bad move. I think he does it too early, though. I think because of this, like, Sam is never going to trust him in this game again. There is no reason for Sam to want to trust him again, and I get it that you can still, like, here's the thing. You can still not trust Sam and Sierra and still make them think that you are good with them. But Andy made it so obvious he wasn't good with those two that I think it really did hurt his game to where now he has to go with that 5. Whereas, like, Rachel, for example, can go pretty much anywhere. Andy has no choice but to work with this 5 right now. And I think that really is his only way to survive. And if they end up taking a shot and it's not at Sue, I think it absolutely is going to be Andy. Right now, I mean, I think he's he's making it to the end, and I think he's going to be a 0-vote finalist. That's very much the vibe that he is giving off. But also, they're just, the confessionals we get are so repetitive, and him just regurgitating the same things over and over again. Again, it just doesn't look very promising right now. So I really do not see Andy winning this game very much at all. So that really is the 5. And like I said, right now, I do think that 5 is making it to the end. I'd be very shocked if that didn't happen. But maybe there's a possibility that they don't. I mean, the trailer for this next episode kind of suggests that something is going to happen between Sam and Genevieve, and it's going to open things up, and one of them is going to be able to supersede one of the spots in that 5. So let's talk about Sam and Genevieve. Now, Sam is an interesting one because I think on one hand, out of the players that have, like, gotten into a shitty position and have, you know, had to kind of, like, change their game, I think Sam has probably done the best job at doing so. I think he's recognized the game that he now needs to play. He was very front and center in the beginning of the game. He kind of had the lay of the land. Everybody wasn't good with him. He was kind of controlling how everything was going on his tribe. But after losing Sierra, he has now been in a much more rocky position, where now he is much more in the bottom of things, and he correctly recognizes that that is the case, and that as a result, he is going to have to pivot. And I think that Sam has done a really good job of knowing what he needs to do, but I also think there are some things he's done that have not been very good, and that I've not been very impressed by. I think the fact that he, you know, especially, this is the most baffling thing that Sam has done to me, is that he goes to Rachel in episode 9, and she deliberately tells him, like, don't say anything, like, don't out my game here, and what does he do? He fucking goes right to Sol immediately and tells him about it, and then is upset that Rachel is bothered by him doing that. Like, I just don't understand why he decided to do that, because now Rachel doesn't really feel like, you know, getting that close with Sam. She doesn't really want to work with him that much moving forward. Like, yes, she doesn't want to necessarily vote him out right now, but he could have potentially been in, but I do think if Sam doesn't do that, he could have potentially been included in this alliance, but because of the fact that he literally does the thing that Rachel tells him not to do and makes it so obvious that he did it really for no reason whatsoever, ultimately that's why Rachel ends up not wanting to work with him. And also, it doesn't really make sense. Like, he should be wanting to work with Rachel, considering that she had no part in that vote out with Sierra. That was part of the reason that she even played the shot in the dark, was so that way she didn't have any reason to, like, you know, so that way she could not be blamed for Sierra going there. So again, it didn't really make sense whatsoever. Aside from that, though, and then I also think his decision to then work with just Genevieve and Kyle and not trust anybody else, that is a losing position to be in. You essentially are now forcing somebody from that 3 to win immunity every single time, and then if it's not you, feeling like you are in a good enough position to where you are not going to be considered the person to be voted out. So I don't think that's a great move for him either. And also, let's say hypothetically he gets to the end with Kyle and Genevieve. I don't think he wins. I think Kyle easily wins out of those 3 just based on how the jury reacted to him alone. And so, yeah, I don't think those decisions are good for him. I think aside from that, though, he has done a good job of recognizing his position, knowing that he's not in this dominant spot. He needs to kind of be a little bit more reserved. He needs to kind of just let options, you know, be presented to him. But I do think that he is in a spot to where he could easily be picked off next if he is not careful. If he's going to stay aligned with Genevieve, who really is everybody's main target moving forward, I don't think that is a great move for Sam. I think the only way he can avoid going at 6 is by trying to forge something with somebody in that 5. Find somebody outside of that. He can make some sort of deal with them and see if maybe he can, you know, move forward. Maybe he wins an immunity here or there. I mean, with Kyle gone, like, it's much more open, but also Rachel just won immunity. So I honestly don't know. I don't think things are looking great for Sam, but at the same time, I think, you know, between him and the other person, I think he does have a better chance of getting to the end. And then we have Genevieve, who, look, I mean, what is there to really say? I mean, just what an absolute disaster these last couple rounds have been for her. I mean, look, I do think that initially, I still stick by the fact that her doing what she did with Kishan and, voting him out, bringing Rome closer to her, that was a good move. But it kind of feels like her game peaked there, because since then, I don't think anything she has done has been impressive. She really has not done a great job of trying to branch outside of her circle. She should have really tried to bring in Teeny closer. I don't understand why you don't let Teeny in, that you are going for Saul. Why you, continue. And also the fact that she even wanted to go for Saul when she didn't really make any sense. I don't think her wanting to target Saul is a bad move, but that is something you do at like Final 6 or Final 7. You don't do it when there's still like 10 people left in the game and things could really end up going south for you, and they really have, to the point now where Genevieve, instead of trying to sort of, rekindle relationships, has instead decided that she just kind of wants to cut everybody off because she doesn't want to betray anybody else, and it's just really disappointing. I think that she did have a lot of potential. I just don't think that she is recognizing it. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who are fans of Genevieve and think that she is this, this like very cutthroat, manipulative player, but she herself said in this last episode she doesn't like playing that way. She doesn't want to play that way. And my issue isn't the fact that she doesn't want to play that way. My issue is that it doesn't seem like she knows how to play the game aside from that. It doesn't seem like she really wants to try to, make more connections. I think there was a way for her to move forward without doing what she did. If she goes to Teeny and tries to make amends, I mean, Teeny wasn't interested in doing so, but maybe she pulls Teeny aside and says, hey, like, I will vote however you want me to vote, and then she votes that way, and then Teeny feels more inclined to work with her, and maybe that's more a Teeny issue than a Genevieve issue, but at least she tries. Instead, she's essentially given up on making any connections with anybody outside of Sam, and I think it's put her in just such a bad position moving forward. I would be very shocked if she is not the next person to go. Pretty much everybody wants her out at this point. Andy even voted her out, so it's really just not looking great for Genevieve. Like I said, there is a hope that in the preview they talk about how Andy might have to be the one to go, but again, I just don't see it really working out for her. I think even if she doesn't go this next round, I think she goes at Final 6. I just don't see any scenario where Genevieve gets that much farther. I think she has burned so much social capital. I think she showed her cards way too early, and as a result, I think that she is definitely going to be she's going to continue to be in a really bad spot moving forward, so I just don't see any real hope for Genevieve. But overall, like I said, I think this is a really interesting Final 7. It's very fluid. There isn't this consistent alliance that's been running the game. There is an alliance now, but that wasn't really a thing up until this round. You kind of have been seeing like Caroline and Rachel especially like silently helping each other out, but not doing it in a way that's like super obvious. And also, I think there's just so many different paths that this could go once you get to that 5. Let's say, Genevieve goes and then Sam goes. I think there's a lot of different scenarios that could happen there. You could have Rachel decide to have her 3 of herself, Caroline, and Sue, but you could also have Rachel recognize that Caroline, is gonna maybe betray Rachel and she doesn't take Sue and she takes Andy instead, or maybe she goes with Teeny. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities for where this can go moving forward. Sam, like I said, I think there's like a modicum of a chance that maybe he ends up in there, but right now I think he probably goes at 6, and I think the final 5, I think it's going to shake out like this. Like, if you really want my honest opinion, I can see it going this way. I think Teeny goes at 5. I think that, I think that Sue ends up going in like a fire-making... I think Sue goes at 5. I think that Teeny then goes in like fire-making, or Andy, and then the final 2 is absolutely going to be Rachel and Caroline, but who is that third? It's either going to be Andy or Teeny. Aside from that, I mean, I just don't see much other options at this point. I think that, really for the first time this season, things seem kind of obvious with the direction that things are going in. Yes, there were quite a few like obvious boosts, but in terms of like the end game, I don't think the end game has been that obvious. I think the past couple episodes it's been far more obvious, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've really liked watching this, like I said, winning trajectory. I like seeing this sort of underdog sort of win from Rachel, someone that nobody really suspected to be a big threat, and now is really in kind of the best position in the entire game. I think that would be really exciting. If Caroline wins also, I think it's a really good win. I think that she's played a really good social game. I think she's recognized, when certain people need to go. I think she's done a good job of reeling Sue back in. I think she would be a really good winner. I think, Sue winning wouldn't be terrible. Andy winning, no, I don't think it's going to happen. Teeny winning, I don't really see it. Sam maybe can win if he's at the end, because I do think he's a really good talker. Genevieve, I think there's generally no chance. Even if she's at the end, I think that she absolutely loses the game. I don't think there's anybody that really is going to respect what she did. I think Saul would not vote for her. I think that if Teeny's there, Teeny's not going to vote for her. So yeah, I think moving forward, it's going to be really interesting to see how these last 3 episodes end up going. I think there's a lot of potential moving forward, but like I said, I would be very surprised if this does not end in a Caroline or Rachel victory. Again, I'm willing to listen, but I am willing to listen to other options. If you guys have a different idea of how you think the rest of the season's going to go, I would love to hear all your thoughts on that. But that's really it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought of all of the episodes that I talked about, as well as this final 7. I'm really excited to review the last 3 episodes, hopefully consistently, do it on an individual basis, because I really do want to continue doing so with this season. I've really been enjoying the season overall. Like I said, trim some of the advantages out and maybe lessen, so much time spent on different twists and things like that. And then I think that this season could have a really strong finish, and I really don't see a reason why we need more journeys and things like that moving forward. I think that we're at Final 7. Let's just make it a bit more straightforward. And I think straightforward Survivor, especially at this point in the game, is the best Survivor. So I would definitely, hopefully, I would definitely hope that's what they're going to end up doing. But other than that, that's really it for this video. As always, if you enjoy this video, I do have reviews of other Survivor seasons, as well as I covered the entirety of Big Brother 26. So if you're interested in any of that, definitely would love for you to check that out. I'm also doing some catch-up reviews for both movies and TV shows. I don't want to say specifically what I'm doing, because if I say I'm doing it, I'm probably not going to do it. So I'm just going to say, other movies, other TV shows. I got a plethora of stuff on this channel. Would love for you to check all of that out and be a part of it, as well as consider subscribing to my channel. But that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know, like I said, what you guys are thinking of the season overall. And I will see you guys later. Okay, bye. Don't worry about your laundry.